Good evening, everyone. So, my name is Dr. Sachin Gupta, and I'll be moderator for today's panel discussion titled Women Empowerment and Healthcare Leadership During and Post COVID-19 Pandemic. This is a very important discussion that we are going to have today. We have very eminent panelists today who have joined us from across all four corners of the country as well as overseas. Um, Before we talk about this discussion more, I'll actually like to go through how we are going to conduct this session so that panelists as well as speakers get to know what are the objectives, and what we are going to achieve out of it. So initially, I'll be talking, I'll be introducing all the panelists. They'll be talking about their credentials, whom they are. Then we'll talk about impact of COVID-19 pandemic on global economy and global health and our day-to-day lives, followed by initial, what to say, discussions from all the panelists who will talk about their stories, how they managed COVID-19 pandemic at their respective hospitals and organizations, what were the challenges they faced. Then second session, we are going to talk about how we can empower women healthcare entrepreneurs, innovators, and women who want to join healthcare workforce, and how we can guide and support them. This will be followed by a question and answer session, whereby the audience. Today we have a very strong audience. We don't have audience only from India, but we do have a very strong audience from Australia, US, as well as Europe. So they be posing their questions on FB, and we have Vikrant on the backside who be guiding us and telling us, regarding the questions. Following the question and answer session, I'll be summarizing everything and sharing with all of us. So that is the flow of this panel discussion for today. Yeah, so let me start with myself. My name is Dr. Sachin Gupta, and I'm founder of a company called Salus Health Resources, which is recognized as foremost leadership advisory and clinical talent advisory firm in India's healthcare sector. I have done MBBS from GMC Patiala and followed by a MBA from National University of Singapore. Uh, After that, I worked with a company called Parkway Pantai, which is today world's second largest healthcare provider. I was based out of their corporate headquarters, followed by a stint in their India operations. And that is the time I decided to start on my own. And the last 6 years have been very amazing. India's healthcare sector is very vibrant, and it has been an amazing experience. Now I'll leave. I'll move over to Dr. Tarang, who is CEO of Reliance Foundation Hospital in Mumbai, which is a ultra premium hospital and South Asia's most premium healthcare facility. To introduce herself, Dr. Tarang, over to you. Dr. Tarang, you need to unmute yourself. You need to yeah.
Yes. So good evening, everyone. Thanks to get all of us on this platform. And yes, my name is Dr. Tarang. I am a graduate of Lady Hardinge Medical College, and I'm also trained in orthopedics as a surgeon. Again, an area where usually women are not that much empowered. And then, of course, I'm an MBA from National University of Singapore with specialization in healthcare management. I think after having stayed in Singapore for almost 15 years, decided to come back to Mumbai. And I had a 7 years role at Jaslok Hospital and Research Center in Mumbai, where I gradually grew up from the position of heading the quality and patients feedback and the various corporate relations to the CEO, and was the CEO for almost 3 to 4 years in that institute. Now I am the CEO at Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital, one of the hospitals where we proudly say that it's the hospital of future because of the focus it has on technology, on the future, and what the healthcare has in it for the future. And alongside the pillars of treating every patient with compassion and with perseverance and with lot of empathy. So I think it's that makes the best of both in terms of healthcare delivery, because as all of us are healthcare professionals, we know that the best of technology, the best of information technology, or in biomedical, the technology of equipments can never is on one hand important, but at the same side, it's the compassion and passion and the empathy with which you treat your patients, which makes it the best healthcare delivery system. So that's in short about me, and we have a esteemed panel here. So now I have them to also introduce themselves.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Tarang. So we'll move over to City of Joy, Kolkata, which has been financial capital prior to Mumbai. We have Dr. Rupali from Woodland Hospital, Kolkata, and I'll invite Dr. Rupali to introduce herself.
Thank you, Sachin. Thank you, Voice of Healthcare, to invite me for this glorious panel. I've been very happy to be part of the panel. Am I audible? Just starting.
You
okay.
are. You are.
Okay. So I'm pretty. I keep calling myself that I'm prehistoric because I keep thinking that I've really done a lot of work in the healthcare for ages now. I think I have chosen to work in hospital management and quality when these were not even heard of. So there was nothing called hospital management when I did hospital management, and I've been told that there was no course in the country. I've been asked to work on public health from All India Institute of Hygiene and Public Health, which is the national institute for the country. And I did post graduation after my medical graduation from Arjikar Medical College, Kolkata, in the year 1988. We entered college in 83. So we are very, very old people. But then again, the opportunity came when in the early 2000, when India was not even talking about quality. A big team of about 9 people went over to Harvard to learn JCIA and quality accreditation, and came back to the country and did work on quality. Two groups worked in quality in the country. One was in Apollo and the other was in WOCHAD. I was working with the WOCHAD team, and in 2004, 2005, we brought in the first JCIA accredited hospital in Indraprastha Apollo, 6 months down the line in Bombay Hospital, Mulund Hospital, Bombay. So we did the first two hospitals, and then actually worked on the basic document of quality for the Government of India. And Government of India then started the National Accreditation of Hospitals in 2007. So that's how the whole quality journey for our country started. I've been fortunate to be part of that journey in our country. And of course, managing hospitals has been passion. I've been working with as the CEO for, again, very, very long time, since 2002 onwards, and been managed WOCHAD Hospital. I have managed Apollo Clinicals, Apollo Group, rose to, as I was just saying, that when I left Apollo Group in 2017, I had 16 portfolios to my to my to me, and have worked in various fields, like social sector, like the industry, like government, and of course the private healthcare sector. Uh, been tried to look through healthcare scenario as a ecosystem, because we all know when you have a problem, you kind of go ahead and hit a doctor and thinks that the doctor is the person who's done all the wrong in the hospital. But it is not so. We all know that it is a huge ecosystem, but people do not understand that even as yet. So our still I have to work. My passion is to work as a collaborator who can think about the hospital as part of and everybody, all stakeholders of the hospital as ecosystem, and have tried to kind of bring the mathematics, the science into the art of medicine. So you need to bring in the measurable elements. You need to talk about what is the quality of healthcare, how do you compare, what are the reference ranges, what are the, and if you keep doing the work the way it should be done mathematically, then I think the finance and the business and your everything else follows, the reputation, the goodwill, all that follows if you keep doing the job well. So as Tarang was saying, the priority is patient care, patient service, the quality of care, everything to do with improving the quality. And I always keep saying that your aim should be the best in the world. So that's how your vision should be very long term, and we think of the hospitals of the future. And that's how you have to keep on innovating, keep on working, because science is dynamic and we have to move on with the dynamism. And that's how I have looked at my work wherever I've chosen to work in Calcutta. uh, but I could have worked anywhere in the world. Wherever you are working, that's how my thought processes are, that you need to look forward to a very futuristic healthcare services uh, which are true for the patient care and would be true for the organization, so that the organization does the turnaround and becomes a transformed institution. That's the job which has been given to me here at Woodlands. Woodlands is actually pre-independence. It was formed. It is the first private hospital of our country, formed in 1946. It's called the Bridge Candy of Calcutta. It was formed by the East India Company. It was formed by the companies for their healthcare requirements in the city of Calcutta. It was all single rooms, and for the premier people, that's the kind of hospital it is. It is not very large in size, but it had always given the best quality care to the upper class of the society. I have come in with an agenda to over the years, I think we have been not been able to keep up to many areas, the modernization, the advancement, and infrastructural requirement, because older hospitals do have infrastructural issues. So I have an agenda to transform the hospital, to turn around, as well as to make it bigger and better. So that's the opportunity, and I think I'm looking forward to giving the city of Joy about 300 bedded hospital in the next 3 years time.
Okay.
That's about,
That
it's a long introduction. I'm sorry about it. You have to handle the timing, Sachin. So
yeah, I'll take care of that.
Just raise your hand, I'll stop. Thank you so much.
I think.
Thanks everyone.
So that's a good introduction and very much required. Thank you so much. So I'll move on to our next panelist, Dr. Sapna Nangia from down south, from Apollo Proton Cancer Center in Chennai. She is senior consultant over there. And Dr. Sapna, can you introduce yourself?
Good evening. I'm sorry, there was a bit of a glitch and it took me a while to join in. I'm basically a radiation oncologist, and I work at the Apollo Proton Cancer Center. I've been in the field of oncology since 1992, and I've worked basically most of my life in Delhi. Before that, I was in the Army, the Indian Army, for 5 years. My brief in Apollo Proton Cancer Center is basically to, this is the first proton treatment facility in this part of the world. My responsibility is implementing this new technology for the treatment of head neck cancer and breast cancer and gynecological cancers. It's a precision technology, and basically, I think the experience of many years, but also being able to adapt to new technology and to deliver it safely for patients. That's basically the brief.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Sapna. So now we'll move over to Dr. Ritu. She's based out of Gurgaon, and she heads FMRI, which is Fortis Memorial Research Institute. This is flagship hospital of Fortis Group. Dr. Ritu, please introduce yourself. Dr. Ritu, you are not audible. Yeah, much better.
Now, is it better? No?
Yeah, it is much better, much better.
Okay, yeah. Hi, glad to be on this panel this evening. I'm Dr. Ritu Garg. I'm the Zonal Director for Fortis Memorial Research Institute. It's in Gurgaon. I think women empowerment is very, very close to my heart. I'm an ENT surgeon with my MBA, so I like to call myself a clinician and management professional. Heart still remains with clinicians always, and it's either way. I have had the privilege to work across functions, strategy to patient experience to clinical talent management. Visiting this hospital now for more than 2 years, and it's been a great, great journey. This COVID pandemic has, of course, brought in a different lens altogether. I'm very proud to say that most of the leadership team in Fortis Gurgaon is comprised of women. So our medical superintendent, head of administration, head of billing, patient care, we have lots of women. I think more than any time in this crisis, you can see how all of us actually come together with passion and compassion both together to manage the crisis. So I look forward to this discussion.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ritu. We'll move on to our special guest from Boston, USA, Miss Elizabeth Clark. Although she's based out of Boston, but she has been advising and working very closely in Indian healthcare sector. So, Liz, over to you. Please introduce yourself and how you have been connected to Indian healthcare sector.
Thank you, Dr. Sachin. And again, it's such a pleasure to be with all of these women leaders in Indian healthcare. As Dr. Sachin mentioned, I'm originally from Boston. I did my Master's of Public Health degree at Boston University, as well as my undergraduate degree. And I am specifically trained to work in low and middle income countries. And in 2010, I received an offer from the chairman of KIMS Hospital, the Kerala Institute of Medical Sciences, to join him in Trivandrum and to work as a hospital administrator. And I had a job description, and as I normally do, I kind of veered off of it and really spent my time learning what the hospital needed and then coming up with programming that helped advance their mission. And part of what I did was I initiated and managed an emergency medicine residency with academic support from Upstate Medical Center in the US, which is a US level 1 trauma center. And I think when I was doing that program, I realized, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this later, that not only putting patients first, but communication is such an essential part of running a busy hospital, and especially the ER, which is a unique institution within every hospital. So I started that program, and then at the same time, I realized that we needed recognition for this. We needed national accreditation. So I worked with a professional society to help lobby the National Board of Examinations. And again, used not only my public health knowledge and my knowledge of emergency medicine, but really spent time, again, effectively communicating and telling people what the benefit was and why that convincing other hospitals that they could do this too. It was not difficult to start. And indeed, it had a real benefit to patient care. And an outgrowth of that, so that was passed in 2013. And an outgrowth of that was I started the first 2 emergency medicine studies, or 2 of the first, I should say, with support from Boston University, from the medical school and public health school, and really started documenting, did the epidemiology around Indian emergency medicine, because not a lot was available previously. So I did this with the goal of informing, but also utilizing that information back in my hospital. So, people would come in and say, well, this didn't work right, or, this happened and we need to be better at it. And so I really used this opportunity to inform stakeholders. And there are multiple stakeholders, not only within the hospital, but within the community. So I was very much, I hope, a connection between not only the United States and India, but within India. So bringing other hospital chairmen on board with supporting emergency medicine, convincing people, stakeholders within the government of India to support this. And I left India at the end of 2015. I've been back in Boston working as a consultant, doing a variety of different projects. And right now I am working for a company called Think Research, which is a leading global clinical content and standardization company. And I actually knew them from my time in India. They came to the hospital and we started implementing their flagship product called Order Sets. And during this time, I've actually been based in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. One of the things that we've been doing is standing up the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Health hospitals with COVID content. And we translate guidelines into what we call order sets. I liken the founder of Think Research, Dr. Chris O'Connor's work, to what Dr. Atul Gawande did for safe surgery. Dr. Chris is doing for medicine. He's making it safer and really supporting the proper management of COVID. And I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through the questions, but certainly it's been, I consider COVID as a public health professional, this is like the Olympics. This is what we've trained for all these years. So the last 6 months for me have been exceptional, as I know it has been for all the other panelists. And how do we manage through COVID? And I spend a lot of my time thinking about this and then working with my Saudi colleagues to ensure that their providers and their patients are remaining safe.
Okay, thank you, Liz, for your introduction. So we'll move over to the next session, section of this discussion, where I'll explain to everybody about the impact this pandemic has caused on global scale. But before that, I'll like to tell why, I'm moderating this session rather than my co-founder Kamya or, Pinky, who's, director at Voice of Healthcare. So we discussed this thing and, we didn't want it to be an all women discussion because we believe that men are equal stakeholders in women empowerment. And, if we actually have to go toward the direction of women empowerment, men have to support that. So I'm representing the agenda today. So I'm all in for women empowerment. Even in my small company which I'm running, so majority of our workforce is women. So that is one part of it. Having said that, we have introduced all our panelists today. And as I said, we have a very powerful and empowered women, from across the India and all four corners of India and as well as overseas. We'll be talking in detail, and listening to their stories, how they overcome the challenges. So, but this pandemic, COVID-19 is very unique in itself because in our lifetime, we have never experienced such a phenomena. We have seen smaller scale, healthcare disruptions like SARS, which was there in 2009, or maybe Ebola in recent past. But the kind of magnitude, this COVID-19 is having, both on economic, side as well as the healthcare side, this is unimaginable. This has actually caught the entire mankind, without any preparedness for this kind of medical or healthcare emergency. There has been a massive destruction and a very deep economic, injury at global level, at national level, as well as, healthcare, because there is footfall, the footfalls have gone down across hospitals in India, as well as globally. Today, when we speak, there are close to 8 million cases of COVID globally. And we have lost some 435K, people over last 3 months because of COVID. In India, there are 3.3 lakh cases today, close to 9,500 deaths reported over the last 3 months. It's very sad. In addition, there is massive job loss, across globe. It has caused lot of psychological trauma for all of us, whether it be men or women, even kids, there was a study which actually reflected, suicide rates have gone up during this pandemic. So we all are struggling. While there are negative sides, this actually has underscored importance of healthcare. This pandemic has exposed, the gaps in healthcare system, not only in developed economies like US or Italy or France or wherever, but it has actually exposed global gaps in healthcare and also underscored importance of women leadership. Interestingly, one of the findings which has emerged over the last few weeks or fortnights is at political level, the countries led by women like New Zealand, Norway, Taiwan, which are led by women, they have kind of outperformed, other countries which are led by men. And the same actually was very true for healthcare organizations which are led by women. So that is why we are having, all these women from Chennai, Kolkata, Mumbai, Delhi, and Boston who will actually share their experience. So I'll start with Dr. Tarang, who is from Financial Capital of India, to share her experiences about COVID and the challenges that she faced during this epidemic. Over to Dr. Tarang.
Thanks, Sachin. So, well, I think all of us have faced equal challenges, and I'm sure, as you rightly said, though we all talk about women empowerment, but all women know that it's the team which is required to accomplish any job. And in the team, there has to be an equal participation from all those who are capable and competent, irrespective of the gender. So, yes, I think Maharashtra and Mumbai is facing the worst of the pandemic. And but somewhere I think we have a very strong hope that we'll be the first to come out of it also. So I guess that's where we are. So we also in Mumbai faced a lot of issues starting from March. It was not easy. First, the realization. I think the pandemic did give us enough time to prepare in India. It started in December, if I'm not mistaken, in China. And I think some of us were started to plan, at least we did at RFH. We started our planning as early as February because we knew that it is there. It's not going to stop. Rather, it will come faster in Mumbai, as we call it the financial capital. So the travel is the highest in this part of the city. So there were times, there were challenging times. I think my whole team has worked very hard towards it. The first, I think the most important job of a leader is to put the right team in place and then work with them as a part of them. So I think we have all emerged as leaders there. And surprisingly, or rather I would say not surprisingly, looking at our chairperson, Asian Alliance Foundation Hospital has almost 60% leadership team with women. And our workforce also has more than 65% are women workforce. So that itself is something which I think is the biggest example of empowerment which we have in our hospital. And so the initial bit was, as everybody knows, was very taxing, whether it is in Mumbai or in Delhi or Kolkata or Chennai for that matter, or for the whole group. So we had to put the proper task force in place, whether it's medical, whether it's the overall task force, the steering task force team on, and then we had to prepare the guidelines over days. I still recall There were like daily struggles to have the right guideline in place for the hospital, because these were initial days. We are talking in February. By February, we were not getting the regular guidelines from at the state or the country level, but we were. I was very clear that we have to put the guidelines in place, starting from screening or whether it is treatment, from whatever clinical evidences or data was available, because you have to have a data focused approach to reach to any guideline. And then, of course, we had a good mix of clinicians involved, as well as non-clinical people who were involved. And very soon, I think we had a very big set of guidelines available from all areas: how to manage the chemo patients, how to manage our dialysis patient, how to manage our transplant patients, and so on and so forth. So we didn't realize, but we created a huge manual which is extending over 200 pages now. Wow. And once the guidelines were done, yes, then slowly we started to build on those blocks. Because as the situation changed, obviously the guideline will have to be tweaked at every end. So initially it started with a simpler screening, then it became more stringent, and likewise every guideline became tighter and tighter. Then, of course, we ensured that implementation was also checked at regular levels through audits, because many times what happens is that you plan a lot, but on the ground nothing happens. So you have to constantly check whether whatever you are planning is happening on the ground, and for that you have to go on the ground. So that's something which I always have suggested all in the leadership team, that leadership is not in your room, leadership is on the ground. So whether it is at any level, you have to be on the ground. If you are on the ground, your whole team is on ground. And of course, very robust systems and processes are required in such a situation. I had a lot of experience in at least seeing what happened during SARS in Singapore and the world, and also I was a part of Ministry of Health of Singapore during H1N1 epidemic when it hit Singapore and other countries. So whatever were the learnings, I think the biggest learning was that you have to have processes in place, you have to have systems in place. They can't be broken just because we want to customize things, because at this stage it is like a war. And in a war, you have to have a line of command, you have to have a strong team, and at the same time, you have to follow the rules to the T. Because in on other peaceful times, yes, you can always customize based on certain request or something. Most of the time, it should not be anywhere which compromises patient care or safety. But on other areas, yes, you have to balance it. But during this time, you can't afford it. One mistake will cost a lot in the organization. So we tried to do that bit, and then came the situation where we got an opportunity to develop a full-fledged COVID hospital, which was one of the first in Mumbai, and that itself is it was really an endeavor. And there also one has to be on the ground, right from the protocols, the way it is made, and from what protocols are followed, what are the guidelines for the isolation rooms, and there was just no end to it. But since we started early, so I think the hospital was up much before or around the time when the lockdown was even announced. So we were all done, and we could come out with a fantastic setup of a first COVID setup, because I think one of the things which and whatever I learned, I think it was very, very important to keep as a endeavor to keep the COVID and non-COVID separate. This is the guideline which we have always seen being followed in many of the countries before, that whether it was H1N1, we had H1N1 hospitals separate and non-H1N1 separate, because as these epidemics are known to behave, they don't go away in 2-3 months. It takes months for them to leave. So at that point of time, 3 months you can have a lockdown. But for non-COVID requirement, you cannot have a lockdown for a long time. So then at that point of time, you have to safeguard the safety of all patients. And it has worked beautifully. And we are so proud that we have been able to make difference in lives of so many patients who have gone home happily with a lot of blessings, lot of best wishes for the entire Reliance team and the Reliance Foundation Hospital team. This whole thing was, initiative was possible only though we had our expertise, we had our guidelines, we had our skill set of technical side, but I think it would not have been possible in 10 days if it was not the support of our parent group. Because so that's why this is an achievement of the entire Reliance, and RFH was fortunate to lead it on the forefront, but our teams are still there, and I'm proud of each one of them who are there daily, day and night. They are taking care of these patients with the same compassion and empathy that our chairperson wants us to provide to every patient who comes to our hospital. So there is no difference in the care, but at the same time, we are able to get more and more victorious over COVID. And at the same time, in RFH, we are taking care of our non-COVID patients. So overall, I think it has been a very, it's been a learning experience for not only me, but everyone who has been associated with this. We are learning till now. So every day is a learning experience. And I'm sure after this, we all will come out with a lot of learnings, which will help us to ensure that we all value the importance of systems and processes, which is something which usually which differentiate a organization from just being a organization to being one of the best organizations. Okay. So I think at the end of the day, I'm a very firm believer of strong systems and processes. I believe that they can manage to prevent a person from making an error. So that's the only thing. The process or systems prevents people from making error. All of us who are from the field of quality, we know that it's never the people who make errors. It's the lack of the systems and processes that make the people to make errors. So if they are foolproof, I think you have you can manage to get the best outcomes. Luckily, I would like to also share that when we were starting the operations of our COVID facility at 7 Hills, that whole team in the forefront, whether it was the person who was heading the operations or the person who was heading the clinical admissions of our patients or our HR person, I don't know whether it was, of course, I didn't do it intentionally, but it happened. They were all women.
Okay.
So in spite of all the challenges of children, in spite of the challenges of running the house, especially in COVID times when you don't have help, it was all of them at one point of time. I was when I took a pause and realized that okay, this is the team I put in place, but it was definitely not intentional, but it happened because they all were the ones that said, we will go, we will take care of this. So I think yes, it's this whole initiative is one of the biggest example of women empowerment that at least I have come across in my career. So, and I'm thankful to each one of them who stood brave because a leader is as strong as his team. And I'm really thankful they were in the forefront. Of course, we were in forefront because we had a very strong support of the men in our lives, whether it is on the professional front or at the personal front, because that's very important as well. Because I personally feel that the way people say that behind every successful man, there is a woman.
Yeah.
I think the story of women is also not different.
Yeah,
You have to have a very strong support at all levels from your home to make you a successful person in your professional life as well as a personal life. So that's from me. I think it was long, but I have tried to sum up the whole Mumbai as well as our experience of COVID and non-COVID.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Tarang, for sharing your experience. And although it was long, but I think it was very useful. And also, we think, the facility, COVID facility that you started, Seven Hills, has been of tremendous help, not only to, people of Mumbai, but this is example for, entire country and world. I was hearing actually the facility which you started in Seven Hills is today the largest COVID hospital in India. So I really appreciate, RFH and team at RIL for starting this initiative, because, this will go a long way. This will have a long-term effects on how we were able to contain COVID within India. Thank you, Dr. Tarang. Yeah. So now we'll move to our next panelist, Dr. Rupali from Kolkata. She'll share her story at Woodland Hospitals. Especially, I'll request Dr. Rupali. You had a very severe cyclone called Amphan in Kolkata. I'll not say that you were at peak of COVID at that time, but you had two disasters at same time, which is very, very unique. So I'd like you to share your story, with us.
Thanks, Sachin. Thank you so much. It was so endearing to, and so good to hear Dr. Tarang's story as how she quickly rose up to the need of the hour and created the COVID hospital. I think it's extremely, extremely thankful, appreciative. Thank you so much, Dr. Tarang. To us in Calcutta, we I think the first case, just to go back to a bit of dates, how it happened. I think the as she mentioned, the first case was 31st of December 2019 in China, and then in India on 30th of January in our country, and then the first case came to Calcutta was a boy from from England who landed on the 17th of March. So that was the date, 17th of February. That was the date when the first case came to Calcutta. The COVID positive who turned positive, and then of course our lives changed and everything got topsy turvy. It just took us, I think, the first phase of our work, especially in the months of February, and even the large part of March was like, you are just trying to find out that how you should work on. We were very different than, I think, is in the month of April and May. I think we have been kind of organized ourselves and started to do work more methodically. Of course, the day one onwards, of course, we had to work on the guidelines. It's a guidelines-based work that we did because the Pandemic Act came in and the government started giving guidelines on a daily basis. I remember the first thing that happened I was just looking through my WhatsApp groups. The first group happened on the 19th of March. And it was a government, state level, private, all put together. They made two WhatsApp groups in our state, and these were all the senior, decision makers, the CEOs of all the private hospitals, and the DHS, the Director of Health Services, Director of Medical Education, the Police Commissioner, the Health Secretary, barring the Chief Minister, who's the health minister. Everybody else was in that group. So we started talking on a daily basis. Everybody, it was initially it started with about 70 people. It's now has about 110 people, and we talk every day. So that's very, very important because the communication was very important to, kind of sharing of communication was very, very vital, because it is a guideline based work that we did. Government started operating, we know how the whole story has happened. I don't want to go into the detail of how it has panned out in the country, and how you take it up with the state and then to your organization is what I'm trying to tell you. So we also started doing, for our hospital, we kind of assessed. We did the first COVID task force. It's a 32-member task force we created, and then we sat for many times, because we understood that the organization is very old infrastructurally, and I couldn't really separate out, in fact, the isolation wards and things like that, which was required at that time, for even now for COVID positive patients. So we kind of went into we understood that we will not be able to really support the the care of COVID patients, because of the lack of infrastructure, because of we didn't have that in our hospital. It's a very small hospital in that sense, very old structurally. So we had only 2 beds we could find out, which are outside the the entire emergency. We remodeled, and we could create about 2-bedded unit, which we actually kept it as a transfer unit when we were transferring the COVID positive patients out of the hospital. So what we did was, we knew that there is something called patients have to be treated for non-COVID, and there were so many instances happening. People started fearing the hospitals. They were not even coming to the hospitals. The entire hospital occupancies of all hospitals, government, private, came down. People started staying back at homes. The lockdown started, almost like life came to a standstill, almost like it looked like that there's no disease. So we kind of worked on very quickly. We understood that the patients can also, we were started to learning about the disease a lot. So we understood that the disease process can be asymptomatic. It can be, and we were, COVID testing started. We also, the Calcutta also started the testing. Our hospital also, we do the testing in our hospital. We have RT-PCR. We started the testing. We have started quite a few hospitals in the country, in the city. But we understood that if we take the patients in, if we have to, anybody can be a COVID positive. So right now, a huge 40-bedded unit for my 240-bedded hospital, I have created a PPE zone, or admission screening zone, which I started very early, very, very early. We actually wrote to ICMR asking for that. We were allowed to initially, if you look at the SARI form, we were only allowed to test for the SARI cases, and also the fever cases, and the people who were traveling in the country. So only these 2 cases were allowed to do the testing. But then we expanded it to ILI and to actually any other pregnant separately. So all those forms, all those categories, after 6, when it stopped, where we also started writing to ICMR, and I think we had meetings with the owners, and then it at the end of month of April, 30th of, I think 31st of 30th of April, we got the 31st of March, we got the form changed, so that you can now test everybody. And you initially, you couldn't even test anybody and everybody, and the whole testing was under ICMR control. Your test kits were under control. Even now the labs are under control, so you couldn't even test. So we were testing very few, and the state also, the mortality rate increased because the number of positives started coming in. So they were and we started introducing the terminologies like comorbid deaths and all that. So there were those kind of things were happening. At the same time, I think we created, once we opened up the ICMR format and could test anybody and everybody, I think the game changer happened. That was on the 1st of April. And we immediately did this admission, the screening zones, and started testing everyone coming to the hospital. So we test everyone coming to the hospital. We didn't even do those HRCT kind of, formats. We do COVID testing. We put them into, the moment the test results are done, we put them into their own rooms. Everybody is given 2 rooms. And then if they're positive, then we put them under a green corridor and make them out of the hospital, transfer them to, we have a team who creates the beds in the other COVID identified hospitals and transfer them to those hospitals. In the state today, we have, between private and public, we have 15,000 beds and about 60 plus hospitals in the state. and our active cases never went beyond 5,500. So we have enough beds for the state, and we have been able to cater to the COVID patients. So there was actually requirement of the non-COVID hospitals, and we lift up to that. We don't call ourselves non-COVID. We say we are a COVID safe hospital, and we are continuing to be. A hospital is full. We started very fast. We started our outpatients. We never stopped it, but people were not coming over. Now I think the services are to almost as normal. Still, the occupancies have not gone up to the occupancies that we keep, but we have still a large number of patients are coming in for outpatient. The doctors are more happier. They are, the protocol, the entire hospital is designed as safe hospital. And we have not only designed, we have created those elements where you become more safer as doctors and staff, but also for the patients. So we admit, like for example, we admit all patients in single rooms. We don't put them into wards because we don't know the status of the patient. The moment their status is done, that negative, then we put them into, if they require a 2-bedded or a 4-bedded unit, we put them into those units. So the entire organization is right now, after this 3.5-4 months of struggle and war and tough work, I think we are absolutely there giving care to the patients who are needed to be given. I think one thing I should mention here, the staffing plan was extremely vital. We understood that the staff comes from pretty far off areas through train and through metro, and they also come by buses, and some of them do use their personal vehicles. So the lockdown actually stopped everyone. So we did a very thorough work on the staffing plan. We thought that someone will need not be coming to the hospital. They can work from home. Someone can be given off. Somebody can work for alternate days, and some people can come weekly, and some people came daily. So we kind of divided those. Then worked on that these people who are needed in the hospital, the critical care group, are given accommodation in the hospital. And then the lower occupancy helped us because we created 2 areas where the staff stayed. We organized their clothing, we organized their food, we organized their pickups and looking after them. So that I think that huge the staffing plan and the engagement that we did with our staff and doctors was extremely valuable because they felt less scared, and they were engaged in giving care. Many hospitals did follow the similar pattern. We started talking to, as I said, that from the day one, we started talking to each other. So we have been able to, pass on the good work from others, and we learned from each other and started doing the right things for everyone. So I think that's how I would say the experience so far has been at Woodlands is more of a COVID safe hospital. Right. We are giving care till about 60% occupancy. We're still not up to our 90%, which is the normal occupancy for us. Wow. But we are kind of, going there. Every month, I think March was better, April was better than March, and May is better than April, and June seems to be a better start than May. So it's kind of slowly moving up, but the state is still locked down till 30th of June. So we are still picking up people, and we are still, working on the same COVID protocol the way we have started. Okay. I think I will talk about the other things later. I still have few more things to say, but till now, this much is the story from Calcutta, City of Joy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rupali, for sharing your insights from East India. And we'll move over to South India. We have Dr. Sapna Nangia from Apollo Proton Cancer Center. And she's a practicing clinician, and she'll share her story as a practicing doctor, the challenges she faced during COVID-19. Over Dr. Sapna. Dr. Sapna, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. So what I was saying was that I'm bringing in a different point of view, and that was really, the challenges faced by hospitals that were not engaged in COVID-related care, and the clinical issues that arose because of COVID. So on the one hand, of course, there was this whole aspect, which of course Dr. Rupali and Dr. Tarang have already mentioned, about ensuring that all these patients who were really not COVID positive, but could be exposed to anyone who was. So how to maintain safety. And therefore, like for example, at the Apollo Proton Center, we created separate corridors. So the proton machine had a different, area for intake, and the other machine for photons tomotherapy had a different area for intake to make sure that, and the staff also did not mingle. The idea was that we needed to compartmentalize so that if one person in the staff was infected or a few people were infected, that didn't mean that we needed to quarantine a very large group of people. So this was one practical solution. Then, of course, the usual COVID screening, etc. But I would say that the big question in oncology has been about how to manage oncology care. I mean, there are 1 million new cancer patients in India every year, and the same in various parts of the world, similar numbers. And then there is a prevalence rate. So there are 6 or 7 million people who are not new patients, but who are old patients and who are living with their disease at some point of time, requiring a follow-up care, requiring chemotherapy, investigations, and so on. So there was, I think we kind of worked our way through this. So I think across the country, people encouraged and gave succor to patients, told them that it was all right for them to miss a follow-up visit, for example. It was all right to teleconsult the doctor and manage without an examination, but at least an exchange, they got a sense of strength from being able to speak to their doctor. So we did a lot of our follow-ups via video conferencing or Zoom or WhatsApp, etc. And then, of course, was the really difficult question: what do you do with somebody who requires surgery? So that evolved. Initially, there was we heard about patients, doctors who were, and OT staff who were dying because of having done knee replacements, for example, which you don't associate with COVID at all. I can understand a sinonasal surgery being very high risk. But now, like Dr. Tarang mentioned, we learned as we went along. So we learned that it was okay to do RT-PCR and maybe do 2 RT-PCRs and then take up a patient for surgery if negative. We learned to do chemotherapy carefully, but I still feel that there is a lot of, you could say, a lot of confusion and consternation amongst patients about how to deal with going to hospitals where they might actually encounter COVID patients. And I think this is something that we will work out as time goes by. So I think this is not just playing out in oncology. This is also playing out in, for example, in dialysis or in cardiology. When we talk about so many beds being vacant, it also means that so many patients are not receiving their due treatment. And also, I think it's a big issue. It creates, for example, how do hospitals generate revenue to treat staff, to pay staff, to quarantine staff, and therefore have enough people available for care. So these are issues that I would say the healthcare industry is, and doctors, nurses are grappling with.
Okay, so that was very insightful, Dr. Sapna, and we'll move over to Dr. Ritu. So my request is, we are already, it's 9:32, 7:32 right now. We are a bit late, running a bit late. So we need to, keeping in view everybody's time, so if we can share our stories shortly, because we already have a lot of compliments as well as questions from our panelists. So yeah, over to Dr. Ritu.
Yes, I think it's already been said, and I think all of us have lots of stories to tell from India, because every city is different. So I represent a Millennium City, Gurgaon, which is full of techies and, full of big software companies, Fortune 500 companies. Having said that, the entire Gurgaon city is dependent on private infrastructure. We do not have any medical college. We didn't have one RT-PCR government lab till yesterday. So all the samples from the government used to go to public. So very early on, we figured out that private sector would have a huge, huge role to play in Gurgaon. So I think a couple of things that we did, probably in addition to what everybody said, obviously we worked on making sure that our safety protocols are up to the mark, and we constantly work with the teams to make sure that we are able to manage all kind of patients, and also how agile we are. So as the situation kept on changing, we kept on making new infrastructural changes. I think one of the call out has been the collaboration and how people rise up to the occasion. This is, as they say, that in crisis, it just brings out the best in people. So we would have an engineering team overnight create partitions and walls that never existed. And the AHUs got separated, everything, and they just worked nonstop. Along with that, a lot of government collaboration. So I think we work very, very closely with the government, giving ideas as well as taking some of the loads. So just as Tarang mentioned, so it's not as big a property, but probably one of the differentiators is in Gurgaon, we did start one COVID facility managed by the three biggest competitors in private sector within Gurgaon. So it was Artemis, Medanta, and Fortis. All three came together to equip that facility and also run it till today. So we have the doctors from Artemis, Medanta, and Fortis, and nurses all together running that dedicated facility, along with what we do in our own premises. I think second very, very important thing, which I think was very well taken within Gurgaon, was the concept of home isolation. So what we started, when we started, having COVID patients, initially there was so much of anxiety and everybody wanted to rush to the hospital. You get a report and you want to rush to the hospital. But I think we learned very quickly that a lot of people don't need hospitalization. 80% can be managed at home. So we launched these home isolation packages where we were hand-holding the patients while they were recuperating at home. And we got a phenomenal response with that. Because now they were just able to isolate themselves at home, but also have the comfort that should anything were to go wrong, they have a person to reach out to, and they're monitored every single day. So there is somebody who calls them every day. They monitor all their temperatures through an app. All of that is reviewed at backend, and there are doctors who consult them through video. And during the course of the stay, if something goes wrong, if the SpO2 drops, then they're brought into the hospital. I think that concept has really caught on in the city, and that has actually helped not fill the beds with milder patients who can, and reserve that precious resource for people who really, really need it. Of course, one of the biggest challenges we had was the lockdown, because NCR is one concept where, people live in Delhi and work in Gurgaon and vice versa. But we had a lot of restriction on the borders, the state borders. And yes, that was a big challenge to get the e-passes movement and do that. But as I said, I think, the entire team just worked relentlessly, and I could see the level of commitment and the way they just come together at the time of crisis to deliver it all.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ritu. So this was very insightful, especially, how the cross-border movement between Delhi, NCR, and Gurgaon worked. And I'm actually, very enlightened to know that there was a dedicated COVID facility which was being run by Medanta and Fortis and Max jointly. So that's very unique. That actually underscores, how human values are still prevalent despite all the competition that we see day to day. So this is a very unique example, and I think beyond COVID also we need to have such collaborations for having good outcomes for mankind. We'll move over to Miss Elizabeth Clark, for her insights and her story during COVID-19. Yeah, Liz.
Thank you. Actually, I want to build on what Dr. Ritu was just saying. I put this positively. If anything good could come out of COVID, it's the adoption of a variety of different telehealth applications. This is one of my particular areas of interest, and it's something that I've actually been pursuing on behalf of my work with Think Research, whereby a colleague who is ex-Medtronic and ex-Baxter in Singapore put a note on LinkedIn a couple months ago saying that her app, it's called BotMD, had developed content in English, Spanish, and one of the Indonesian languages for their clients. And to, please be kind, because they put it up in 48 hours, all this COVID content, but please take a look, and she'd love their feedback. So immediately I got in touch with her, and I hadn't spoken with her in close to 10 years, and said, what are you doing? And bang, we were off. And we've been having some extremely fruitful discussions. And I think as equally important, people are starting to, patients are, as well as providers, are starting to understand that there are things that we can do without going into the hospital. And I say this, COVID has forced people out of the hospital, but yet how do we develop care mechanisms, telehealth applications that ensure a very high quality of clinical visit? And I say this because everybody in my family in the United States almost is a doctor, and we're all learning to adjust, and indeed are coming up with good ideas of how, what do patients want and how can we provide it? And so we've been actually collaborating with technicians trying to develop some of these applications. So this is as part of my work with the ICMR Biodesign Board. I would love to see more young, well, not even young, any entrepreneur come forward with a really patient-centric telehealth application. And I think Dr. Sapna also, talked a little bit about this. And, is it okay to look at, for example, post-care, look at that, that wound, is it healing correctly? Ask the patient, do you see pus? Does it smell? That's okay. You don't need to come into the hospital necessarily for that. So there, like I said, if anything good could come out of COVID, it's the rise of telehealth and providing high quality care from outside the hospital. So I'm excited to see where this takes off and leads us to in the next 10 years.
Okay, that sounds great, Liz. Thank you for your insights. So we are already off, time by 10 minutes. So I think, we'll not have time for the second round of session. We'll go to the Q&A session, and I'll, start with the question from audience. Now, collaboration between Medanta and Max and Fortis. So the first question I'm going to have is from city of Karachi. You're talking about, global audience. The first question is from Mr. Badal from city of Karachi. So they are congratulating us, and he's saying, and I'd like to pass on this question to Dr. Rupali. You're saying, Badal saying, panic due to COVID-19 across the globe. How to prevent masses from anxiety, stress, and depression? Dr. Rupali.
Okay, thanks for the question. I think it's important to know. I was actually wanting to talk about the communication. Good question, and the right time that I'm thinking. So what we did was, I think it's very, very important to be at your best. And what I said was that let's talk about pandemic survival tools. What are your tools? There are 5 tools that I talk about. Let me read it out for you all. So I did a video which I'll share with Sachin, if you can share it with everyone. So I said that I created actually a series of communication. One was pandemic survival tools, then I did a pandemic inspiration, and then I did a pandemic safe hospital. So the survival tools, I say that there are 5 things that you need to do. The first one is optimism. You have to opt for it because it's a way for looking into the meaning of it in adversity. Turn an optimist. It will help you to fight off the fatigue, depression. It will improve your immunity, and it will make you live longer. The kindness, next is kindness. It nourishes, it heals, it strengthens, it uplifts. Kindness stimulates the release of happy chemicals, and that can increase trust, it reduces fear, it reduces anxiety. Third is rationality. Our beliefs, which causes us distress, should be put to test rather than simply believed. So rational thinking reduces stress, it helps us judge things better, and it acts with reason. The fourth value is resilience. I think the hard times should not overcome you. Please find a way to come back stronger than ever. Resilience is associated with longevity, lower rates of depression, and greater satisfaction with life. The last one is, of course, empathy. Give yourself the gift of connecting with people in deep and meaningful ways, not superficial. It can do wonders for your health. Empathy promotes abilities that helps us handle stress and prevents burnout better. So these are the 5 survival tools I would say. I will share the video also so that we all are at the top of our mental health to handle the epidemic and these tough
Right.
situations.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bali. Thank you so much. So the next question is for Dr. Tarang. So the audience is saying your hospital is a centrally air-conditioned hospital. How did you manage to make your rooms, OTs, and ICU compliant for COVID patients?
So good. It's a very important question. So that is also one of the reasons that we said that we will develop the COVID facility at this hospital where we got the opportunity to work with the government. And our chairperson had the vision to do the best for most of the people and as many people as possible. And this was just one of the initiatives of Reliance Foundation where we tried to serve the people who are suffering from COVID. So one of the key things was that we wanted to not compromise on the safety. Nonetheless, the hospital, as in the main Reliance Foundation hospital facility, is not only modern by its technology, but also by its design. So there are theaters which have negative pressure because there are theaters which can take care of and have taken care of patients who initially we didn't know the status, but eventually they came out as positive in the initial days, and they were subsequently discharged after their surgeries with no damage or no harm to them as well as to our healthcare workforce. So, as I said, all these guidelines and protocols when they were made in February and by mid-March. So, I think our hospital's task force group was formed in somewhere third week of Feb. And then finally we moved on. By March, we were all done with these policies, including the fact that the first question which came to my mind, and probably because we are women, so I said, what about the pregnant women? Because they'll deliver. And where is the facility for them? And how will we have an organization where a woman comes? Those times we were not even, we did not have the protocol for the women. So we were, I think, one of the first hospital where we came out with that protocol that, okay, we take, and today also the protocol as we move towards normalcy, or what I call as our new normal, we have the protocol in place to take every patient who comes as a suspect, because there is no, we all know from all the clinical evidence that 1 or 2 swabs is no indication that the person may be completely negative for COVID. The swab can come out positive anytime between 2 to 14 days. The swab may not be, may be a false negative. So there are a lot of uncertainty. So it's better that the way we accepted other diseases, we accept COVID also as a part of a disease for which we have to exercise all the precautions that it takes. And I can say that now with quite good confidence that if you follow all the protocols and guidelines, we can sail through it, and COVID will just become a part of life. And I think
Yeah.
Once it becomes like that, it will probably also go away from the planet of Earth.
Okay. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Tarang. So next, quick question is for Dr. Ritu. So somebody saying, one of our audience is saying, women are actually endangered than empowered. So that is what the audience feel in, COVID times. Please, if you can, share your feelings about this, since you are living in a millennium city.
So no, we're not in. We're resilient. Women are resilient by nature. We are. Over evolution, despite whatever has happened, I think we have continued to grow, and we've continued to push, and we've continued to thrive. So pandemic or no pandemic, women leadership will continue. I think they will come out stronger, more empathetic, and no, we're not in danger at all.
Yeah,
Not in
I
danger.
agree. I agree. I agree.
Of course, we have a lot to work on. I think also we take some of our privileges for granted. I must say that many of us are very, very privileged with the kind of support systems that we have. And there are women out there who are struggling more than that. But I think the only way for that is for all of us to stand with each woman. Each women member of our teams understand the challenges they're going through, and just be there. We have to make sure that we are the shoulders, for other women to lean on.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Ritu. So the next question is clinical in nature. So I'll, pass on this question to Dr. Sapna. Dr. Sapna, you need to unmute yourself. So one of the audience is actually asking, the monsoon season is coming, and the symptoms of COVID and regular flu are very similar. So how do we, differentiate between flu that our population is having during monsoon and COVID?
So, flu is not exactly a monsoon disease. It's more of a winter phenomenon. And there are some things that we understand may be pointers towards COVID, for example, loss of taste and loss of smell. However, I really don't think there is any other method by which we can differentiate one from the other. So if there is somebody who's exhibiting symptoms of, either fever or shortness of breath, they are going to be put through the drill for investigating for COVID.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Just to add, I think if they were talking about the dengue, because this is the time when the dengue season is on.
Yes.
And the hospitals are full with dengue.
Sure. Dengue, of course.
Yeah,
Very right. Dengue is something for which I guess then that would mean that perhaps the battery of tests would include, besides the RT-PCR that we are doing for COVID, it would be the same process of a differential diagnosis that is a part and parcel of practice of medicine. I think so that would be in 2020, it would mean that the differential diagnosis would be COVID-19 as well as dengue.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Sapna. The next question is for Ms. Elizabeth Clark. So do you have any advice for women entrepreneurs and innovators in healthcare space in India?
Thank you. Interesting question. I would encourage women who are working in biodesign, biomedical field, who are practitioners, that if you have a good idea, speak up. I say this because I think that often in that field, it was difficult to even good ideas had a good time sometimes seeing the light of day. Be persistent, keep speaking up, and look for a good mentor. And if you have any questions about that, please just link in with me, and I'm happy to guide people and teach them how to get your ideas forward. And I say this as someone who had to do it in my own hospital and indeed did it on a national stage in India. But I'm interested in the best ideas coming to the top. So and that's going to happen by advocating and explaining to people, your idea, and then taking their feedback and listening to constructive criticism. But yeah, I'm excited to see what's going to come out of all this. Absolutely.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much. So the last question is from me, and I'll actually pass this question to Dr. Tarang. What can be done to further women empowerment in our country, and how can we all as stakeholders in healthcare and women empowerment, what can we do to further women empowerment in our country?
Thanks, Sachin. So I think one of a great scholar of our country, Swami Vivekananda, once said that a country or a nation which does not respect the women can never be great.
Yeah.
So I think along the same lines, we are a part of a country where women are worshipped, forget respect. So we need to grow up to that situation where we have a standardization of this feeling that women are to be respected. But that should not be given at a specific stature. The respect has to come equally for both the genders. But yes, in India and in many of the countries, men are always, nobody uses the word like empowerment for men. It's used for women.
That's
and
right.
at the same time, we talk about equality. So I think we need to be equal, and automatically empowerment will come through as a country. So women empowerment can only be achieved if there is an equality for women at all platforms, whether it is social, political, or economical. And most importantly, I think as women, we need to empower women who work with us. And I'm fortunate. I have a chairperson who is an epitome of empowerment, not only in India, but across the globe.
Yeah, that's right.
And, there is countless women who take her as a real role model. And likewise, I think we all have to, when we work together, we need to respect and have everybody as equal, whether as a part of team or as a leader, and empower women for different roles, for different responsibility, to rise up as a nation altogether. And in an organization, it is very important to ensure that when we say equality, we have all the employees at equal level and assessed at the competency level and not with the gender bias. So if there is a deserving woman, she needs to get her share of success. And if there is likewise, if there is a deserving man, he needs to also get his equal share of success. So it is equality which will automatically bring empowerment, because as Dr. Ritu rightly said, we are definitely no longer an endangered species anymore. We are quite resilient, and not from now, it's from time immemorial. So with this, I think we had a great session, and I'm sure all of the people who are listening also. So respect, and I think equality is the word. Empowerment automatically comes along.
Of course. Thank you so much, Dr. Tarang. So we are already off mark by close to half an hour. So I'll summarize the entire session in one line. I personally believe, and based on your inputs in today's session, when women lead any organization, Corona or any such pandemic can be defeated. So that is my one line summary for this session. And I'd like to thank all of you for this wonderful session today. We had a lot of insight. We had global audience. We are getting a lot of compliments on my side screen from Indonesia, Pakistan, and of course, US, UK, everywhere, including, access to, somebody was actually offering free access to some of the medical literature from some publication company. So this tells us, that today's session was very, very useful and insightful for all of us. And I'd like to thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Tarang, Elizabeth, Dr. Rupali, Dr. Sapna, Dr. Ritu. And thanks a lot to all the audience who joined us from all across the world. And good night. And those in US, have a good day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
For being a great moderator for the session. It's not easy to have so many women on a panel and manage them so well.
Yeah, I'm
Thank you,
amazed at
Sachin.
myself.
Thank you, Sachin.
Thank you,
Good
Sachin.
night.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good
Good night,
night.
everyone. Thank
Bye.
you so
Good night,
much.
everyone.
Meet
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.